So first of all, good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be in Lisbon, and Lisbon definitely factors into my story. I'm speaking for some time, and I don't have visuals, so I thought the best way to deliver this presentation is to group it in 3 acts, 3 parts. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to tell you my story, a little bit of background, but more importantly, about this last incident in my corporate career, about whistleblowing, about calling out greenwashing at Deutsche Bank's asset manager, DWS. The second part of my speech is going to focus on what that was like, what it's like to whistleblow and go through that. And then finally, and most importantly, discuss the aftermath, how it rocked the financial industry. So to begin with, I studied at the London School of Economics and was really keen to go into finance. I became an investment banker, and after about 10 years of doing this, I read a book called Banker to the Poor by Dr. Muhammad Yunus. It was about proliferating microfinance. And Dr. Yunus provided a business case for microfinance. It was the first time that it totally rocked my world, where I could see I could apply my financial structuring skills for something good. And that opened my life to impact investing, and that began my journey in sustainability. Now, I lived through the great financial crisis, and there were many lessons learned. The most important one was that without regulation, we bankers can get out of control. It's very important to have clear regulation and clear guidance on disclosure requirements. The biggest lesson was this: not only do we not break the law, but we shouldn't break the spirit of the law. Don't get cute, don't get fancy, don't spin. Don't missell, don't misrepresent, and don't lie to your stakeholders. And that's important because my career culminated in a dream job. I was appointed the Chief Sustainability Officer of DWS, a very large asset manager with almost $1 trillion of assets under management across the globe in every asset class. And I thought, wow, oh my goodness, what impact I could have with $1 trillion. So off I went. I joined the company, and this is Deutsche Bank. My eyes were open. I understood that they had had some cultural issues as well as some regulatory issues. So when I joined, to give you the background, Deutsche Bank was being investigated because Deutsche Bank had banked Jeffrey Epstein, and it was being investigated by one of the US regulators because the bank ignored suspicious activity reports. It was Deutsche Bank and DWS was also under investigation for roughly loose compliance and financial controls, particularly when it came to anti-money laundering. And one of the regulators in the US threatened to close down DWS across the US. And then finally, DWS was embroiled in the Wirecard collapse. DWS decided, unlike a great chunk of the market, to go massively long Wirecard at the end of 2019 and in 2020, in spite of the prolific reporting from Dan McCrum that this was a severely fraudulent company. So my eyes were open when I joined. And what was incredible is that in the job description as Chief Sustainability Officers, one of the tasks was to be a change maker. So, and I said, I can do this. I bought into when the CEO said, we're overhauling culture. This is a true restructuring. And so I was firmly convinced this was a new world. So off I went, just like a little puppy tail wagging, and I was going to get to know the firm. And again, you come in, this is a large firm, and please note, there was a lot of good here. There were a lot of committed people doing a lot of good things. But pretty quickly, I stumbled into some bad areas. And I can see that there were issues with product development, there were issues with the firm's ESG research and risk assessment systems, and also troubling and concerning ESG reporting, public statements. So the first thing I tripped over was Wirecard. And I said to the folks, I need to understand how Wirecard became the top position in 2020 in an ESG dedicated fund. On so many levels, it shouldn't be there, and it's just common sense. The firm, right, as you remember, was started because it was a payment system for gambling and pornography companies. And then secondly, it had been under investigation for fraudulent financial reporting. And so the FT, in fact, was calling out most of its sales revenue. So how did it happen? How did it get into this ESG portfolio? So off I went. And, I got the answer. I reported out to my boss, the CEO, and the management board, and explained what was happening. Now, I wasn't concerned at this point. Like at any company, a large company, someone's doing something stupid. There's a fat finger someplace. We're human beings. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes. So I reported out on, all the issues. And of course, you don't arrive at a board meeting just with the problems. You arrive with the solutions as well, the action plan. And of course, with action plans, I need some resources. I need more headcount. I need more investment in technology. And so I had my asks there. The CEO responded very poker face, as the rest of the board did, and listened to the concerns I presented. And of course, I made it super clear. What I had found was the following. DWS, with media presentations, press releases, prospectuses, annual reports, DWS, the company, was telling the market that it was quite advanced when it comes to ESG investing. They promoted and were very proud about their ESG engine and their smart ESG integration framework. And they described this as, quote, world-class, sophisticated, above industry standards, utilizing artificial intelligence. Now, internally, this is the system that placed Wirecard in the ESG fund. This is the system that, as late as June 2020, gave Wirecard the second highest ESG score from their proprietary system. And what was interesting when I pulled the report, it cited Wirecard is a great ESG company. It has strong governance and strong business ethics. The same month as the company collapsed and its CEO was being arrested. This doesn't mesh up. There is a problem here. But the board and the CEO, and I presented these very troubling, these tremendous, huge, monumental red flags, and I'm not getting any sort of answers. I'm not getting the green light to make the changes. So fast forward another 6 months, I still don't have the okay. I'm being spun around, lots of gaslighting, lots of committee meetings, but no approvals. And of course, it culminates, we're approaching, the deadline for our annual report. And I was an editor to edit all the ESG and sustainability sections. And the basis, what was sent to me, was last year's annual report. And I just redlined it to say misstatement, misleading. I remember internally, I messaged on email the global head of research and asked, hey, do we use AI? Do we use artificial intelligence in our ESG database? And I got an answer, no. So how could we be telling the world that we're above industry standard? What is the industry standard? The other troubling bit was that the firm wanted to say that the majority of the assets under management, majority of these assets were ESG compliant complying with some sort of ESG or sustainability strategy. In fact, they came to a number. They told the world in 2019 that $451 billion was ESG aligned. And in 2020, they wanted to report out even a higher number, $459 billion. Well, I'm head of ESG, and I couldn't find the tracking system anywhere. So I asked all the senior execs, where is the database? How are you tracking this? Where's the tracking system to determine that the majority of our assets are ESG aligned? And I was told, we have none. I said, where'd you get the number? Because guess what? At some point, the US SEC is going to come in here, and we're going to be audited. And the SEC is not just going to look at today. They'll go back in time to ensure there's consistency, and it makes sense. We can't report on numbers. This is material if we don't have the data and the evidence behind it. And so I refuse to sign off on these statements in the annual report. And unfortunately, so the story goes, I was fired. And it was brutal. It wasn't a situation where I was called down to an office with HR and told, unfortunately, we're letting you go for these reasons. Here's your settlement package. Instead, one day, I just couldn't get onto the platform. And the CEO hired a lawyer who wrote to me to say that my termination was being issued. I was working in New York at the time. And he said, we sent it to an address in Frankfurt. Your termination letter is in your mailbox. And I said, could you send me an e-copy? No. So I'm in this insane situation. I'm fired. I'm in New York. And I don't even know what's happened. So I have to call up a friend of mine at Deutsche Bank, at the investment bank, to say, could you do me a favor? Could you meet with my landlord and just go through my mailbox? I think I've been fired. But the company won't talk to me. HR won't talk to me. My boss won't talk to me. I don't know what's going on. He did do that, and he took pictures. And there were 3 pictures he sent me, because there were 3 pages in this letter. The first 2 just says, you're fired. You're fired. We don't have to give you a reason. You're within your probation period, so we can just fire you. The 3rd letter was from the Workers' Council, part of HR, and it said, you are beyond your probation period. This is a wrongful termination. The Workers' Council also followed up with a phone call to me to say you should take legal action against this company. Something very bad is happening. So my world was just blown out of the water at that point. I'm a single mom of 3. I'm in New York, and I don't know what to do. The next thing that happens is that an article hits Bloomberg, and the CEO, my CEO, decided to write an internal email to all employees at the Deutsche Bank Group. And what he said, to sum it up, it was very passive-aggressive, that I underperformed as a sustainability officer, and I had questionable business ethics. That email, same day, was leaked to Bloomberg, and Bloomberg published part of it. So now I'm fired, and I'm publicly discredited. And then the 3rd knockout punch was I get a letter that the Germans were throwing me out of the country. So at the time, I was based in Frankfurt, though I spent a lot of time in New York, and they had pulled my work visa. So I'm jobless, I'm homeless, and I have no career prospects. What do you do? So now I'm going to move on to the second part, whistleblowing. So up until this point, I had kept everything within the company. I aired my concerns to the management. When I got fired, the penny dropped that I think I've just been fired in retaliation. So I wrote to Deutsche Bank. I wrote to Karl von Rohr, the president of Deutsche Bank, and also the chair of the supervisory board of DWS. Explained everything. It was a bombshell letter because I attached the data, the evidence to my allegations. And I explained there was a massive gap between the company's public communication, so a massive gap between public ESG claims an internal ESG reality. There's a huge gap between the say and the do, and that is problematic. That, if it's material, which I considered it was, that is what's called securities fraud. That could be a civil violation, it could also be a criminal violation. The response was nothing. I was ignored. Eventually, what was written to me was that this was simply a DWS employment matter. That was it. So now I didn't know what to do. And I really struggled. And I thought, maybe I just get another job, just forget about this. But every interview, there was an elephant in the room, right? The company would say, what happened, Des? Where did this Bloomberg article come from? And what did you do? And I didn't know how to respond. So increasingly, I felt there's only one way, right? They're not destroying me, right? They've made this up. They've done vicious things. This is unfair. No way. This isn't happening. And so I determined I'm going to go public. How do you do that? So I knew somebody at the Wall Street Journal. I reached out and I explained, I think I might go public with my story, and I have documents to support my statements. The Wall Street Journal, the person took it, and about a week later, I received a call from Lisbon, and it was a woman by the name of Patricia Kausman, a senior journalist at the Wall Street Journal, based in Lisbon, but also part-time in Frankfurt. And she was interested in my story. Patricia and I worked together. I sent her all the documents. I didn't want it to be a he said, she said story. And I said, listen, I'm only going to call them out on the evidence that I have, the written documents, email chains, risk reports, and slide decks. And I handed it over. And I was really nervous because now it's Patricia's story. It's no longer my story. I also decided if I'm doing it, I'm going to do it properly. I'm going on the record, my name, and I'm going to make a statement. On August 1st, Patricia published her story, and it was a bombshell story. And that was the first day that I got back my narrative and my truth. It was out there. It was a very balanced depiction. Of course, she also took a statement from DWS, who absolutely denied everything. The statement from DWS was this: there is no basis to Desiree's allegations, so no basis for it. And secondly, there has been no misconduct here. There's been no greenwashing. The Wall Street Journal followed up with a couple of more articles, as well as many other media publications. At this point, it attracted the interest of US financial authorities. The SEC, the FBI, and the Department of Justice gave me a call, and it said they opened up their own investigations and asked if I would be a voluntary witness. A few weeks later, the German authorities followed, and it culminated eventually in a federal police raid. 50 agents raided the headquarters of Deutsche Bank and raided the headquarters of DWS. And what happened afterwards was disastrous for the company. The CEO was removed, as well as many other senior leaders. The stock price tanked by about 14%, and it cost them tens of millions in legal fees to handle this. And it's God only knows how much it's cost them in lost client revenue. Tremendous reputational damage. Now, the investigations are still continuing. They're ongoing. There has been one guilty verdict by the Department of Justice, and the German police had said that there was a basis for the allegations, and hence they had a great deal of suspicion about what they called prospectus fraud to raid the headquarters of the two institutions. But it was hard for me. At this time, everyone wanted to talk to me, but no one wanted to hire me. And suddenly, I have this, I'm called the whistleblower, the DWS whistleblower, the greenwashing whistleblower. But what was interesting, while personally it was traumatic, there's no doubt, I'm homeless, and I had to run back to my parents' house at the age of 49. I'm living in the basement of my parents' house. I can't rent an apartment because I don't have an income. I have no settlement from the company. They just stopped talking to me. But interestingly, there was also no NDA. So I decided to continue to publicly speak. But I decided to publicly speak not just about me, to tackle this issue of greenwashing, because guess what? DWS might be the more extreme case, but greenwashing, I believed, was pervasive. We lived, if you remember, not too long ago, where every company was very superficially virtue signaling, coming out with statements. ESG, sustainability is in our corporate DNA. Diversity and inclusion is our top priority. We're all about climate action. And we, the market, knew that, some companies were taking action, but a lot weren't. And that this was a bunch of BS grandstanding. There was a green asset bubble, and that needed to pop. And that's what the DWS story did do. It absolutely rocked the industry. And now I'm going to move to kind of Act 3, the aftermath. What happened? I'm pleased to say that the industry, because I wasn't sure how they were going to take this story, would I be portrayed as just a disgruntled employee, just going after, playing the girl card, going after the company? Instead, the market listened to the story and said, you know what? This is important. This is a cautionary tale. We need to properly understand what happened, and we need ourselves as corporate executives to take a look at what we're saying. Is there integrity on our statements? Are we living up to our public boasts, pledges, commitments? Are we delivering on our products and services that are labeled green and sustainable? And that's what happened. The market marked itself to market, took a step back and said, you know what? We need to discuss this. Greenwashing is pervasive. And I think that's very, very healthy. A market correction is always healthy. And so although there are claims that now we've gone the other extreme, there's green hushing, I don't believe that. I think that we've now transitioned to a marketplace that is a lot more considerate, and people have learned a lesson that you need to be as accurate about and as rigorous on the controls on your non-financial disclosure as you are on your financial disclosure. ESG and sustainability isn't a PR tool. It's not an island unto itself. This is a paradigm shift. It's like complying with new, MiFID regulation or Dodd-Frank in the States or new technology. This is about changing your company. This is enterprise-wide change, and sustainability needs to be embedded throughout. It's not just part of communications. And I think that lesson has been heeded. Now, the story, of course, also attracted the attention of the regulators. And we've heard a number of regulators state that they are intent on cracking down on greenwashing. I think that's good. I think that's very, very good. But I'm also going to caution regulators that the most important thing for financial regulators is to ensure that companies clearly report out. There are clear disclosures. And we probably need to be more helpful to companies to provide them with standardized sustainability reporting requirements. And the IFRS is working on that through the ISSP's initiative to provide companies with standardized reporting requirements with regard to financial materiality, to ensure that investors and all stakeholders understand a company's risk profile with regard to climate change, for example. I think that is a great development. Europe is considered, of course, the leader in sustainability regulation. And I do believe that when Europe embarked on its Green Deal and its intent to mobilize more money into sustainable investments, that's a good thing. I believe Europe was very well-intentioned. Unfortunately, the execution has been somewhat botched. And rather than learning from that and taking a step back to say we need to be clear and maybe even go a little bit slower and help companies more, they've come out with further regulation. There was recently a consultation, and the European supervisory authorities asked the market for evidence with regard to greenwashing, and asked the market, could you please answer some questions? What drives greenwashing? How we can mitigate or prevent this? I made a public statement. And the best way we can tackle this is, of course, number one, providing companies with guidelines on reporting and not make it too difficult. Let's start slowly and clearly. Let's phase it in. But secondly, very importantly, we need to ensure there's enforcement. Having tons of regulation without supervision and enforcement is what I call form over substance. It becomes a box-ticking exercise, and that can enable greenwashing. So my message to Europe is dial back all this regulation. It's impractical. Creating classification systems and taxonomies and requirements for what's called double materiality, it's impossible. They can't supervise it. They can't enforce on it. So what's going to be the result? On my greenwashing story, there was one regime that didn't reach out. I had governments around the world reach out. Europe didn't. Brussels didn't want to hear from me. And I don't think that's a good thing. And so for me right now, what I'm doing, I've jumped in, I'm in the mix. I work with a number of organizations and financial institutions focused on tackling greenwashing, but also raising the bar on ESG and sustainable investing. Again, we have tremendous global challenges. They're existential. We all know that. How are we going to tackle this? I believe, here's the way. First, we have to ensure there's no gap between say and do. We need to tackle greenwashing. Companies need to understand that in today's world, if you say it, you have to follow up with action and you have to prove it. So we need to get companies to, of course, reduce their carbon emission profile. That's very, very important. But secondly, we also need to mobilize more money in investment. So if I had recommendations for Europe, for the European Union, on how to achieve their lofty goals, provide more supervision and enforcement on this market. Nothing raises the bar, nothing controls Wall Street better than having enforcement actions. Naming and shaming companies, financially penalizing them, and if necessary, if it's really bad, folks should go to jail and there should be clawbacks. Trust me, if companies know that you can get in serious trouble by greenwashing here, they'll think twice about doing that. And that's a means to tackle it. But I also think that Europe needs to promote and mobilize and have greater incentives to invest in clean technology and clean energy. And I think Europe needs to properly respond to what the US has done. I know that my statement is going to be controversial because the US Inflation Reduction Act has been criticized as being protectionist, but it's working. And I think Europe needs to do a better job. Less red tape, clearer incentives to mobilize this money, again, into innovation. So those are my two tips. And then finally, maybe I'll close with another tip is that, if a company executive, does want to exaggerate their ESG claims and their sustainability officer is concerned, think twice about firing the sustainability officer, and you might want to read about DWS. Thank you very much. And now I would love to engage and open it up to any audience questions. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm a sustainability director of a construction and design company. I really liked what you just said. I really resonate with you say our clients are really struggling with this greenwashing, greenhushing, and I find it really difficult, particularly because on the environmental part, there's a lot of like advance, and even I'm based in London, so we have like at the moment creating of frameworks to make sure that even if you claim net zero or carbon neutral, they have to be agreed with kind of like the industry, in the construction industry, which at the moment it's a problem, so it's not even happening in a policy part of it, it's actually an association separately. But how actually do you measure the social part is what I find really more difficult, because there's one thing about the storytelling and then there's the other part that you really measure the impact. I just would like to hear some thoughts of you.
Well, I empathize with you. It is really, really hard, and we, the market, haven't done a good job. You've got, different reporting frameworks being thrown at companies. It is a tough market to navigate. There's no good answer at this point because we haven't standardized these sustainability reporting requirements or how you measure, right? Metrics around social issues, social topics. That's in development. I mean, we're very much, that's that, that cliche expression, we're flying the plane as we're building it. And it is tough. The only thing a company can do is just approach this in a very sober manner. Don't look at sustainability as promotion, right? Sustainability, ESG, and I do believe we're going to evolve away from using the term ESG. It's very much about future-proofing your company, adapting to a new world. It's about resilience planning. It's about spotting opportunities, new markets, new investments, new products. And I think we need to frame it that way. And the best approach a company could have is not have a glossy, sexy sustainability report, but again, weave these ambitions and targets and goals into their regular way reporting and approach it in a very sober and humble manner. This is a journey. It's going to take a lot of time. And just report out as clearly and as conservatively. Always take the conservative approach. And by the way, it's okay for a company to say, look, we'd love to go net zero. We're just not sure yet how we're going to do that. So know that we're looking at this, our intent is there, but we're still formulating a practical action plan. As soon as we have it, we'll report out. That's much better than saying we're going net zero and faking it until you make it. So it's not like, it might not be the best answer, but the best way is just clear disclosure and a conservative approach.
Thank you, that's where I agree with you. Like always backed up with data.
Absolutely.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm a chief bioinformatician, so I'm somewhere between biodiversity and IT. And one thing you mentioned, do we use AI? And someone said no. And a lot of what I think you meant about ESG and the bubble is that it's vague and not well defined. My question is, if there's an ESG bubble, there was an ESG bubble, how far are we from an AI bubble where, we can't distinguish what's real AI or not at the moment?
It's a very good question. So one of my roles is to chair a wonderful nonprofit organization called Venture ESG. And it's about providing a fit-for-purpose framework for startup companies, for the venture capital space. And of course, right, the concerns when you're a startup, generally in the technology sector, is not so much going to be about concerns on your manufacturing supply chain and human rights, right? It's very much going to be about AI ethics, data privacy. Now, this is a tough one. I'm not in technology, but I'd venture to guess there's a great deal of inflation. It's, again, a buzzword. But ESG and AI intersect, and companies need to do a better job at their disclosure and describing exactly. Everyone uses digital, everyone uses AI. Exactly what they mean. The same rules apply there. But again, unfortunately I'm not completely in that technology world. But very similar conflation and inflation. Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you so much. I'm going to be here later, and I'd be happy to engage one-on-one.